Hello and welcome to A Sunny Book Nook. Today I'm going to be doing my May 2021 wrap-up for you. I know it seems impossible, but we are in the smack dab middle of the year. So June, it's here, and it's Gemini into Cancer season. So we're thriving, but also not really, because we're in Mercury retrograde up until like the 22nd of this month. So if you are feeling off, which I am, I have been feeling off a little lately, that's probably why. So don't even worry about it, bae. Don't even worry about it. In the month of May, I read 12 books, and these 12 books ranged in mediocrity to greatness, so let's just get right into it. The first book that I read in the month of May was Kink by R.O. Kwon. I talked about this in my most recent video, the underrated Asian LGBTQ books recommendations that I had, and this is a book that is edited by an Asian woman who kind of put together these short stories from a bunch of writers that you know and love, all around the common theme of, kink, and all of these stories are dealing with the way like sexual relationships and romantic relationships and how they play out and what they mean for different people, and it was really interesting, and I enjoyed this read. I gave it 3 stars. I thought that it was pretty quirky and intelligent and queer, and it's like a fine little collection of short stories, basically. It definitely had moments of discomfort for me, and there were definitely stories that I connected with more so than others, and they all just kind of had a almost more mellow, darker vibe in this like quiet way, so I thought it was fine. It was a 3-star read. The next book that I read was Confessions by Minato Kane. This book I rated 4 stars. This is a thriller, and each chapter we get a different perspective from a different character involved within the crime that this thriller kind of surrounds itself on. And even though it's like a crime thriller and mystery, it feels more like literary and suspenseful and psychologically thrilling than like being in the actual moment of like these big murder scenes happening. Basically, there's a middle school teacher. It's set in Japan. I think this was translated sometime recently, but was published in the 90s in Japan. And this is about this middle school teacher whose daughter was murdered by 2 people in her like 7th grade class, 2 of the kids. And so we kind of get the perspective of the day that the teacher walks into the classroom and announces to the class, you all know that my daughter died recently, and blah, blah, blah. Also, I'm quitting soon. Also, people in this very classroom killed my kid. And so then each chapter following that, we see the way that the events unfold from the perspectives of different characters within the classroom, like the substitute teacher who comes in, the kids' families. Like it was just so fascinating how everything played out and unraveled on such like a weird, fucked up level. But it also has HIV/AIDS as like a major element of the story and the stigma towards HIV/AIDS, and it also has moments of it just being transphobic and misogynist, and there are thematically and within the details of the text things that are questionable. Of course, we are asked as the reader sometimes to question it, but in other times, not really, because the kind of ultimate perspectives that we get from all of the different students and the teachers and the adults involved within everything that happens following the death of the middle school teacher's daughter, it was just so wild, and I was gripped the whole time. I was like, what is going to happen next? This is so wild. I can't believe this. I also thought that the exploration of the relationships between students and teachers and parents and children and students with each other was fantastic and so minutely dealt with in such an interesting way. And I think that the perspective and the involvement of like children who aren't like small children but also who aren't like teenagers yet is like pretty rare for this genre, and I think in general for a lot of fiction is like that centered towards adults. It was really good at what it set out to do, I think. So yeah, that's why it was a 4-star. The next book that I read was Incensed by Ed Lin. This is book 2 in the Taipei Market thriller crime series, and I did not read the first book, which I forgot what it's called, but this book, I had an okay enough time with it. I thought that it was like fine. I thought that what it did really well was convey the atmosphere of Taiwan and Taipei and the night market, because our main character is a guy who runs a like barbecue like meat stand, or like a, what are they called, like when you have like a skewer, like a meat skewer stand in the Taipei night market, which is known for being a touristy hub where people come to like get Taiwanese street food and stuff. And so he runs the stand, not because he like wants to, but because it's been part of his family for like generations back, so it's kind of his responsibility to be in charge of it as well. He has a girlfriend who is a grad student, and she's like a STEM girl boss, like smart lady, and there is the people that he works with, who works at the stand with him, who are basically dudes who have been there for longer than he has, and all of these things that kind of unfold when his cousin goes missing, and his uncle is someone who's kind of involved in like Taiwanese like mob, gangster, mafia type shit. Like he's kind of like a boss in that way, and his daughter has gone missing, and so there are a lot of discussions here of like ethnic and socio-political tensions within Taiwan, within how these characters interact with each other and the things that are said, and the way that our main character's perspective kind of is infiltrating and colors everything we experience, because we're in the first person like perspective of the main character, the guy who runs his stand at the night market. The business of running a small business and the way that the political economy and student protesting and being gay and all of these things are thematically tied throughout the story was really engaging. But I gave it 3 stars because I thought that the way that the story was told, like what the story actually was, there wasn't enough there for me personally. I just didn't really think that the different plot points and the pacing of it was quite done well. I wasn't really a fan of, I think, some of the perspectives that we are kind of given as the correct ones as well. There's some things that I was like, I don't know about that, but okay. Yeah, it was like a 3-star read for me. But I think that like the vibes of it and the atmosphere of it, really good, but like the actual like meat and potatoes of the story, I was just kind of meh about. The next book that I read was A Dark and Hollow Star by Ashley Shuttleworth. This book is a queer fantasy that deals with the fae, so fairies, and we're following a main character who is iron-born. Iron is like a component of like mortal and human like flesh and bodies, so people who are iron-born are not like fully fae basically. So our main character, her mother is like part of the royal family, I think, of the fae kingdom, but her dad is like a random mortal dude, like some professor guy, and she herself doesn't really contain that much magic. So at the very beginning of the book, we see her try to go in front and appeal to like the administrators of like the Fae Kingdom to be like, okay, can I be granted Fae citizenship? And they're like, no. And she's like, well, if she's not granted Fae citizenship after a certain age, then she will have to rip from her memory the entire knowledge of the existence of the Fae and her best friend, who is like a Fae prince, and like, you know, a lot of her family and the things that she grew up around. So she doesn't want to lose that connection to herself, but this like larger institution that she really doesn't have much control over is very much against her becoming like a legally registered and recognized as Fae. So we're following that storyline, and she's our main protagonist, but we're also following different perspectives throughout these chapters, and we don't fully understand the perspectives that we're getting and why until later on throughout the book, so I don't want to like spoil anything. It was like a fun young adult fantasy novel that is about fairy people and just the wild things that come with that, and the 18-year-old teenage main character trying to figure out how to navigate everything because she doesn't feel like she is a hero of any story, and she doesn't really want to be. She just wants to like live and like just be herself and be a person, but a lot of things seem set out against her being able to do just that. So I rated this book 3 stars. I thought that the writing was very like YA fantasy and cringy in those ways, and I thought that the way that these characters were portrayed and the magic system and how Fey magic worked and everything, I thought it was like fine, but it wasn't anything too creative or immersive. I thought that like, you know, the world building wasn't that great. There were moments where I was like just distracted because I was like, is this supposed to be important? Like, why am I supposed to care about this in various moments of the story? And I just thought that it was, as like a fantasy book, it was just pretty like mediocre, honestly, but there were a lot of like queer relationships and themes throughout that I really appreciated and I enjoyed, so this was a 3 star. The next book I read was 99 Ways to Die by Edelyn, and this is the 3rd book in the Taipei Night Market series, and in this story we are following our main character trying to save his former classmate Peggy, and her dad is like also like a mob boss type figure in Taiwan, and he's like, he gets engaged into this bullshit, and Peggy's dad is the one who like gets kidnapped and taken to like a warehouse or whatever and like put in a dog kennel and like live streamed to the rest of the country. And this book was very fun. I enjoyed it more than the first book I read. I thought that the atmosphere and everything and the characters that we knew and loved from the first story were all there, and like these like blunt sort of character dynamics and interactions and dialogue I just appreciate, and like the humor of that, but also of course it's like in this thriller we really do get to see ourselves and our main character get in these like life and death situations that are really like nerve-wracking, and I thought this book just kind of had me at the edge of my seat much more so than the first book because the stakes just seemed to be so much higher, and I enjoyed it. I rated it 4 stars. The next book I have here that I've read this month is The True Queen by Zensho. Again, I talked about this in my underrated LGBTQ book recs video, and this book is a sapphic witch fantasy story that has to do with a Malaysian witch sister duo, and one of them can perform magic and one of them cannot. They're like twins, but they don't remember the history of themselves. They just know that one day they showed up on the island and the lady on the island, the magical lady, like took them in. The sort of like inciting incident in the story is that there is a school of dramaturgy for women in London, and the lady who runs it is like was the person to open the school for women magic practicers, because dramaturgy, what they call magic in this world, and this is set in like the 1800s in England and like Malaysia and the fairy land, because it was limited to, the practice of magic was supposed to be limited to men for so long. Like she was like, no, fuck that, I'm gonna make my own like school program for girls to learn about magic and dramaturgy, and so she did. And so there's like a cultural exchange program almost of the twins from Malaysia going over to the School of Dramaturgy in London and to like learn about their type of magic, and also show the royal sorceress or whatever, the one who runs the school, like their uses and ways of magic. But on the way to London, the sister who actually does possess magic like vanishes, and so they're trying to search for the sister, trying to figure out what's going on. And there's also some political machinations going on within the School of the Dramaturgy, the dramaturgical school, as well as within like fairyland, which we kind of get into, and like the fairy queen. So this book was so much fun. It was so queer and magical and whimsical, but also high stakes and high tension the whole time, with characters that you both hated and loved, and like the magic just felt so tangible almost, and it was such a lovely story. I rated it 4.5 stars. I thought that the humor, but also the depth of the writing was just, it was really touching and I enjoyed it. So the next book that I read in the month of May, I physically have with me, and that is Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. I know you guys wanted me to read this when I was doing my TBR video, which by the way, I totally failed at TBR because this is the only book on that TBR that I've actually read. I know, quite unfortunate, but failing my TBR part 2. Why do I do this to myself? I literally always fail my TBR, like it doesn't even matter what I do at this point. Anyway, Pachinko. This book was amazing. I rated it 5 stars. I knew that you guys knew that I would enjoy it, and I knew that I would enjoy it, but now that I have read it, I'm like, wow, that was really good. The way that we follow that generational story and the gendered and colonial forms of violence and the economic and social hardships and trials that all of our characters are put through, and the way that all these relationships and the way that kind of circle back around and they get passed through blood and through children and through people, and the family secrets that are held and kept, and all within this very vibrant setting of Japan and colonized Korea. It was such a lovely story. I enjoyed it a lot, and the way that history and politics are portrayed in this in a very tender and personal way, oh my gosh, so incredible. Love this so much. Thank you so much for recommending this to me, and I'm glad I finally got to this because it's been sitting on my shelf for so long, and I've been told to read this book countless times by people who don't know I talk about books on the internet, so yeah, very happy about this. The next book I have on this list that was also on my other, my underrated LGBT Asian books list was Phoenix Extravagant, and this book I rated 4.5 stars as well. It was honestly a very interesting read to get to right after Pachinko because it explored the Japanese colonialism and imperialism in Korea in this fantasy way through the lens and perspective of our our young main character who is non-binary and an artist, and they are just trying to survive, and their older sister is just trying to make ends meet basically, and they kind of get roped into working for the military of the empire. And there's magic, there's machination, there's these machinery things, there's a metal dragon. Political, social rebellions and crises and everything. It's fantastic, and I thought that the way that queerness is subtly but portrayed in a way that's not, it doesn't justify itself, it just is, and also how art and the description of the art was portrayed, it kind of reminded me of Brandon Sanderson, honestly. It kind of reminded me of The Emperor's Soul, but a longer version, and obviously just there's different elements to it, but it kind of reminded me of that novella, which I really enjoyed as well. So the exploration and crossover of colonialism, magic, art, love, family ties, and empire, but it was just incredible, and rebellion. I enjoyed it a lot. The next book that I read in May was Princess Floralinda and the 40 Flight Tower by Tasmin Muir. Tasmin Muir wrote Gideon the Ninth, which I read last year and felt meh about. I think I rated it 2 stars. I did not really like it. I was not that gripped. But this book, absolutely adored this. I rated it 5 stars. This is a novella, and it's about a princess who is locked up in a 40-flight tower, and she is waiting for her fairy tale to happen, for the prince to come and rescue her, but all the princes that try to rescue her die on the first attempt to try to enter the tower, because the tower is guarded by a dragon, but on each level of the tower there's more obstacles and things to fight basically. And so Floralinda, it kind of gets sick and tired of just living in this tower, and she's like, you know what, I'm just gonna try to go, I'm gonna free myself. Within that process, a fairy gets blown into her room, and this fairy is a bitch and really mean but they kind of end up helping each other, and their little banter and their relationship kind of develops over time, and how this fairy kind of helps Florinda escape this tower. How Florinda kind of changes throughout the process of, you know, how she's a princess at the very beginning and she's just your average like princess, but in order to survive and in order to like get out of this place, she has to like fight goblins, and then she has to like fight like trolls, and there's like a giant poisonous spider. Like there's so many things that she has to go through, and this novella kind of follows it through chapter by chapter. Like each chapter is titled whatever thing that Florinda has to deal with on each like flight, and it was just such a wonderful exploration of how we deal with things and how much of who we are is based off of like the things that we choose to do and the things that we've been told to do. And like it was just such a quirky retelling of a fairy tale, and it really takes the concept of like the princess saves herself to like the next level. And it's just so queer and fluffy and silly and incredible. It was so incredible. When I finished listening to this audiobook, I like had to re-listen to it. And the next day I was like, I need to listen to this again because it was just that good. And me talking about it right now makes me want to listen to it again because it's such the perfect mix of like genuine sentiment but also like whimsy and quirky like magic. I just loved it so much. So yes, that's a 5-star, obviously. Next up, we have Finlay Donovan is Killing It by Ellie Casimano. This book I rated 4 stars. It is a thriller and it's a mystery crime. I fucking loved it. I thought it was just a really fun and engaging novel from start to finish because we're following our main character, Finlay, who is a burnt out single mom who has recently been divorced, and her ex-husband is like her landlord, and her ex-husband was cheating on her with their real estate agent who now like lives with him down the street. And she has several small young children, and one day she's an author. She writes like suspense romances, and she's at like a meeting with her agent at Breadco or Panera, but I'm from St. Louis, so we call it Breadco. At Panera with her like literary agent and telling her, you know, they're talking about the book and whatever. And then she notices that this lady who's like sitting there watching this conversation unfold drops her like a note or a napkin, and on it says like, I need you to like kill my husband for me. I'll give you like 50 grand for it. And she's like, whoa. And eventually she gets like roped into like murdering and hiding and getting away with and possibly getting involved with like the mafia in their city. And yeah, it was a very fun, wild book from start to finish. Really talks about women and their relationship to men and their husbands and the complicated their interactions with each other and other women. And there's very distinct like class differences here and struggling with like money versus people who come from like so much comfort and wealth. And it was just a really fun like white mom thriller novel. And I thought it was very funny as well. There were moments where I was like, oh my gosh, very silly. I thought that the writing, because it's like a thriller, you know, it's not going to be like literary. It was just fun. It was a fun time. I thought that our main character was kind of annoying at many points because a lot of her like inner dialogue was in like her monologues and stuff in her mind was like, oh, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. I guess I'm doing it. It's like, girl. And also on my Goodreads review, which you can find me on Goodreads if you want to. It's always in the link in my description box. This book is really giving No Body, No Crime by Taylor Swift featuring Haim. Like, it's giving that. The marriage drama to the killing your husband / and then there's no body, you got new tires on your truck, like, it's giving everything, okay? The next book I read after this was One for the Money, Janet Ivanovich. This book I picked up because I was just in a thriller mood after Finlay Donovan is Killing It. I was just like, I want to read more about girl bosses who get involved with crime and they're not really quite sure what to do about it. And this book is definitely about that because our main character, also in need of money, is trying to not live with her parents in New Jersey in their home. And she gets caught up with dealing with dudes whom she knew from like her childhood and her high school experiences because she ends up working for like her cousin as like a bounty hunter, basically, as someone who like brings back people who have bail on them to the prison, and so then she gets like 10% of the bail money, like cash up front. So that's what like she really needs, and she gets caught up in the chase of trying to track down this ex-cop who shot someone supposedly in cold blood and just like ran away with it. She gets entangled in this, and she attempts to find this guy and bring him in, but every time she runs into this guy, she has no training or anything. She just has to like be like, pretty please, can you come with me? Like, and so this entire book we kind of follow that. But this book, even though it is very funny because it is written to be a humorous thriller crime novel, even though it is quite funny, it is also deeply violent in a lot of ways, and specifically the violence against women throughout this entire story, and the way that is kind of the central, we figure out later and later throughout the book, like that is kind of the central figure and element of the story that ties it all together, that the violence against women that is experienced, and how that plays out and works, and like that New Jersey white trash kind of vibe was very prevalent within this book, and I just thought it was kind of mediocre. I gave it 3 stars. I thought that Stephanie Plum, our main character, the detective or whatever, the bounty hunter, she was frustratingly incompetent, and she knew it too, but she would still do things when she knew she wasn't competent. The thing that I liked about the Flora Linda and the 40 Flight Tower story is that even though our main character, the princess, is literally a princess and incompetent at being able to save herself because she's a princess, she learns and grows throughout the story, and there is a level of that in Stephanie Plum, but not enough. Like, I mean, I know it's like a series, so I'm sure she gains more skills and gets better, but I also felt like the kind of romance element of the story was kind of just like, why is this necessary? This feels trashy almost. That was just not for me, so I rated that 3 stars. The next book that I read, and the last book that I read in the month of May, was The Seventh Perfection by Daniel Polanski. This book is another sci-fi fantasy novella, and I thought it was fine. We are in the second perspective point of view, basically. Every chapter is someone else, another character that we're running into, speaking to us. So it's like, oh, hi, whatever the main character's supposed name is, hi. Oh, I see you got a necklace? That locket? Oh, yeah. Oh, that's from your mother? Blah, blah, blah. And things kind of play out from there, because in this city, in this magical world, like, there's been a rebellion, and now there is a new leader on the throne, and everyone is like, oh, yay, the new leader, he saved us, and there's all this mythology and lore about him and how this country so came to be. And our main character is trying to uncover the truth of who she is, and because the seventh perfection in this world is like, you went to like a music school or some sort of like magic and music school, and you like move up the ranks of perfections, and she made it up to like the seventh perfection, and so she's a highly accomplished like harp player, and I thought that this book was very interesting, but I just wish that there's like more of it almost, and the way that we get insight of our main character through other people speaking to our main character, and it's like we only see their end of the dialogue and not our own, and we can only really understand what the main character is supposed to be saying and the state of her mind based in what others are saying to her. It was a really interesting setup and framing device, but I think that the themes that this book was trying to explore about power and corruption and systems that come about and how they maintain themselves, the way that like magic and these interpersonal relationships and these things play out, I just felt like it could have been more cohesive and like tight and pulled together, and maybe even like longer, and there could have been more done. But I also thought that it was a very fast-paced read, and I enjoyed it the whole time. So yeah, I rated it 3 stars. I thought that it was fine, but it's not something that will necessarily be like really sticking with me in terms of like fantasy sci-fi novels that I've read. I don't think. Those are all the books I read in the month of May. 12 books. That's like on the lower end of the scale of number of books I try to read in a month, but better than I think March, when I read like 11 books. I was a little bit slumpy then, and I'm a little bit slumpy now, but you know, we move and we continue. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video and like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already. Let me know down in the comments below if you have read any of these books that I'm talking about today, talking about here, or if you want to get to any of them. And I will see you in my next video. Bye!